Oh, now we're recording. Okay. Welcome, everyone. It is March 21st. It is officially spring out there, so it's fantastic. So we'll call that the official start of real estate season. We are seeing a whole lot of activity just in the last 2 weeks. And if you've been on these calls for the last few months, you've kind of heard me talk about real estate season, talk about mid-March. It's here, and we're seeing signs pop up left and right. We're also seeing transactions being set up and other transactions closing. So it's great. I'm really excited about this. Before I get into real estate inspections, appraisals, and valuations, just a little bit about the market. Actually, before that, even I apologize for the conference call yesterday. If you were waiting for one, I got stuck in a meeting and I just couldn't get out of it. So I didn't really have much to say. But as far as the markets go, looks like the Fed is going to raise interest rates again, and it's just going to keep putting pressure on the housing market. So inventory is still really, really low. Interest rates are still pretty low. So I don't anticipate too much craziness this year, but I'm not really sure about next year. If you have a starter home in Seattle for $700,000, and interest rates are at 5.5% or 6%, that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot more in payment, and that's going to put pressure on the market either to bring prices down a little bit, they might stagnate a little bit, also put pressure on people's finances so they default more. All that stuff can happen. So we're going to watch it really carefully. I know the Fed is super aware of the real estate market. They've got to get the Fed rate up a little bit so that they can do any sort of quantitative easing later on if they have to. It's a natural place for it to be, but the problem is it's been artificial for so long that it's just difficult for people to swallow a 5.5% interest rate or a 6% interest rate. So anyway, I'll keep you advised as we go through that. That's all I was going to talk about yesterday on the conference call. But today, in spring, it's real estate inspections, appraisals, and valuations. So I think most of you know the drill. Just go ahead and enter a question into the chat room. Megan's watching that. I see it as well. I'll try to get to it as soon as I can, and we will move forward. Okay, this one's going to be pretty quick, I think, today. So difference between inspections and appraisals. Some of you are newer, and so sometimes this is confusing. It's pretty simple, though, if you just think of it this way. The inspector is the eyes and ears for you, for your client. They're paying for a service. They go out and they basically inspect the house for the client. The appraisal is the eyes and ears of the lender. So they're doing it to make sure there's a valuation there that can support that loan amount. So pretty simple. Those are the two things. They're both paid for by the buyer, unless otherwise agreed upon. I mean, in some cases, the seller might pay for it, but I don't know why they would. A lot of times in really hot markets like Seattle, I think Boise is going to see this. Every market's hotter. So Spokane, Tri-Cities, Central Florida, we're seeing more activity there now. You're going to start seeing pre-inspections. So a pre-inspection is effectively when the seller goes, you know what, it's such a hot market, I'm going to take on 4, 5, 6 multiple offers. I'm going to pre-inspect the property so the property is not tied up for 10 days. So the pre-inspections can happen. Make sure you check on that. Again, in this hot market, that's what people are doing, so they don't have to put the property back on the market. Pre-inspections are great because that is when the seller pays for it, and bam, it's all right there. I mean, inspectors aren't going to hide anything. They're not going to minimize the information that they've got to benefit the seller. That's against the law. So anyway, look for that. If you ever have questions on that, let me know, because ultimately you're going to be getting into escalation situations, multiple offer situations, things like that, and I can help you navigate those. But that's the difference between the inspection and the appraisal. There's different kinds of inspections. There's different kinds of appraisals. So let's start with the inspections. Inspectors, how do you choose one? Now, there's a lot of different ways. You can let your fingers do the walking. For you younger agents, the old ones know what that means. There used to be something called the Yellow Pages. It was actually a book that your fingers actually flipped through. I'm being a little bit facetious. I think you all know what it is, but it seems like something that was so long ago that we used every day. Let your fingers do the walking metaphorically so that you can get on the internet, you can find an inspector, you can develop that relationship with them. In our offices, we keep, a few different cards, a few different inspectors. There are a whole bunch out there, and quite honestly, most of them, the vast majority, are really good. It's rare that I hear about an inspector really screwing it up, but they do. They're human, so it does happen. Ultimately, you want to develop a relationship with one or two so that they're kind of your go-to people. But also, you have to juggle and weigh timelines. So, for example, an inspector might be one you're working with is going on vacation. He's just not going to be available for a week. Another one, it might be a VA inspection, and that takes a specialty designation, and so they might not be available for 2-3 weeks. So a 10-day inspection period is not going to cut it. So what I do is typically I'll call my 2 or 3 people that I trust and have used in the past and say, hey, are you available? How soon can you get out there and inspect this house? I can be out there tomorrow. Another one might say I can be out there in a week. And then I have to weigh the cost as well. So they can vary from, God, we have one in Spokane that charges $250. I don't know how good he is. I haven't used him. I would expect $300 to $400 right in there. And it does depend on the size of the house. So if you have this behemoth of a house, it's going to take more time. And so they'll take a look at it and give you a quote. But ultimately, you choose that inspector. They go out. Technically, you have to be out there to meet them. Now, a lot of them have their own keys, but you should go out there and meet them. They're going to want payment. I typically meet them out there with the client if they can get out there. If they're busy and they can't break away from work, that's fine. I'll meet the inspector out there and make sure everything is clean and kosher and give them a good report. But it's nice when they go out there as well, because then they get to meet the inspector. They also get to pay the inspector, which is pretty important to the inspector, and really kind of see what they're looking at as they start poking around. They don't necessarily have to get up on the roof, although I've seen that happen before. If it does, do not let them get on the roof. Obviously, there's lots of liability involved. There's lots of issues that can happen. So we don't want our clients climbing around on the roof and falling off, and you guys can figure out what can happen from there. So make sure you're out there to greet them, talk to them, start figuring stuff out. And again, technically, it depends on the state you're in, but I think all the states we're in right now, the agent has to be out there on site. So if you're not there and you're having them lock up, I don't want to hear about it. So don't email me or tell me about it. But I do know occasionally that happens. And most of the inspectors are good. They typically take 2 to 3 hours. They're poking around, they're testing breakers, they're testing circuits, electricity. They're looking at the attic space, the crawl space, the siding, the roof, the gutters, the fascia boards, the concrete. Everything. So it's a really good thing to do. One other note on that, when you're talking to your clients, sometimes you get these weekend warriors that really, really think they know a lot about construction. I happen to be one. So they like doing projects on their own, and they might come in and go, hey, you know what? I don't want to pay for an inspector. I'll just buy it as is. Advise them against that. It's common sense. Most people want to do an inspection. The state wants us to advise them always to get a professional inspection, always seek legal advice if that's what they want or need. But the more professionals we can defer to, the less risk we take. So I think that's pretty obvious. So always let them know. Sometimes you get people that are professionals. They've got a contractor's license, they're licensed, bonded, they've been doing it for a while, they're flipping houses, they're going to tear the thing apart. If there's mold behind the wall, they're going to tear out those boards and put new ones in or mitigate it somehow. They know what they're doing, and then you can mark on the box, waive the inspection. So in that case, that's fine, but always advise them to get the inspection. And they're out there for 2 or 3 hours, and they're making sure everything works. There's a lot that goes on there, and so the more experience an inspector has, the better. Typically, you're going to find people that You know, they were in construction for years and years. They had their own contracting firm. They're kind of in semi-retirement, and they're doing a few inspections here and there. They typically have a great deal of knowledge. I'm always a little bit gun shy if I see a new inspector, a young person. That doesn't mean they're not good, but it just means they may not see everything that a more experienced professional would see. And that's the case with any industry. You guys know that. I've met some really good young ones, but you just want to make sure. And they're guided by the law. They have their own rules to follow, their own inspection reports that they have to report on, and different levels of service they have to meet. So they're all professional, they're all licensed, and for that part, it's usually pretty good. But make sure you get someone that can do it sooner rather than later. Now, sometimes inspectors will give you a report on site, like they're jotting notes down. Old school ones are like physically doing the inspection and jotting them on the inspection report as they go. Most people now will jot notes down, but then they'll go back to their computer, they'll enter the information in and send you the inspection report. Inspection report, if you haven't seen one, is roughly 20 to 25 pages, somewhere in there. And again, it covers all those things: electrical, plumbing, siding, roof, all sorts of different things in there. And they'll basically say whether it's good, whether it's normal, or whether it's a hazard. And they typically will mark on there like green, yellow, and red little boxes. If it's a hazard, that is definitely something you want to point out. They typically, again, will send the report to the client and to you. Make sure they send you a copy of the report so you can go through it with your client. You're looking for those red flags, literally in red. You're looking for anything that is a hazard or a warning or has met its life expectancy. For example, a roof, it might be a 25-year roof, and it's got 2 years left. That can be a real problem with the financing when they get to the appraisal as well. So the financing does not see the inspection report, but an underwriter can ask for it. So just be aware of that if they see something in the appraisal and the underwriter's getting kind of cold feet and they're like, you know, this loan's not looking so good because of the house, they can ask for that inspection report. So be aware of that. You don't want to withhold anything. You want to just give it to them and with all its warts, let them see it. And then you can negotiate with the seller and the buyer about what's going to be mitigated, what's going to be fixed, and what's not. Any questions on the inspections? Nope. Okay. Well, let's rock and roll. Let's keep on going. Water and tea. We have a cinnamon spice tea today. It's actually very delicious. Salute. Okay, different kinds of inspections. So you do the regular inspection, again, with the circuitry of the house, the plumbing, all sorts of different things. But then you've got some other issues that you might need a special inspector for. Okay, yeah, let me get to attendees. I want to mute everybody. Okay, there we go. Special inspections. So it can be a pest inspection, it can be a sewer inspection, it can be a roof inspection, and you can ask for extra days there. So in your inspection response, so typically, let's say the state of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, you have 10 days. Get the inspection response back to the seller, say, you know, everything looks good, we waive the inspection at this point, or the roof needs to be replaced. We'll go to the major end of the inspection spectrum. And that's going to be that the roof needs to be replaced. Occasionally we see that. That's not good news. That's not something that a seller wants to hear because it most likely is going to kill the deal. But not always. I mean, if it's a reasonable seller, they're going, look, I've got to replace it anyway. I know it's deferred maintenance. I should have done it years ago. It's my bad. I'll take care of it. That's in a perfect world. In our world, they dig in and say, no, I'm not going to do it. And then, you know, obviously the buyer's like, well, I don't want this crummy roof, and I've got to replace it the day after I move in, and so on and so forth. And we still don't know what the appraisal is going to say. So the appraiser could also call it out as well. So that's usually the biggest ticket that we see on an inspection response. The smaller ones are like, you know, hey, replace the outlets in the bathroom with GFCI, ground fault circuit interrupters. Those are the ones with little buttons. So it interrupts the circuit at the level. So if water gets into the socket, then boom, it trips and it breaks, and you can let it dry out and reset it and it should be fine. That's why those are in every room where there's water, kitchens and bathrooms. Okay, so special inspections. A pest inspection, it depends on where you live. The inspector will be looking at the siding. They look at bulges in the siding, they look at holes, they'll look for ants and termites. The biggest one we have here in the Northwest is really carpenter ants. Down south, there are termites as well as carpenter ants and red ants and all sorts of nasty little ants. I don't think the red ants infest the house, but certainly a carpenter ant can get in there. They can start gnawing at that wood and compromising the integrity of the structure. Now remember this, if you know an adverse material fact about the house, your client has to disclose it if they're selling. So they have to, and you have to disclose it as well. There's just nothing hidden. Be painfully honest all the time and you're going to be fine. But they have to disclose it once they learn about it. So we see sometimes people, they won't disclose it. They didn't know about it. An inspection happens. Now they know about it. They put the house back on the market. The deal falls through. They put it back on the market, and then they don't change their inspection seller disclosure. I'm sorry. They don't change that form. They have to change it. Once they know about an adverse material fact, they got to put that on there. And we can all get nailed for not or for withholding information we know about the house. So just remember that. But the pest inspections, you need extra days. You ask for another 5 days, let's say, for a pest inspection. They typically will be like, fine, we'll give you those 5 days so you can find a specialist to come out there. Before you ask for a certain number of days, you might want to do a few phone calls to find out if there's enough people, inspectors, that can do this. There might be only a few inspectors in your area, pest inspectors that specialize in that, and 2 of them are on vacation. It could be August, and they're like, hey, no one's around. So you might need 10 days, you might need 15 days to do that extra inspection. And then, of course, at the end of that inspection period, you can ask for additional mitigating processes, whether it's fixing the sewer line, fixing the pest, terminating the termites, anything like that. So, and that's in the inspection response form. Now, real quickly on days, I know people get confused on days. Remember this, hopefully you remember this, is if it's 5 days or less, weekends don't count. Okay, so you don't count when you're counting days, you don't count the weekends when it's 5 days or less. When it's a 10-day period, you do count all calendar days, okay? And it can't finish, whether it's 5 or 10 days, it doesn't matter. It cannot end on a weekend. It can't end on a Saturday or a Sunday. So we just had one of these yesterday where there was some confusion with one of our newer agents and another agent, and the inspection period ended on Sunday. And so it was it was a lesson for our agent once I got involved and kind of explained it all. But just remember that, can't end on a weekend. So the pest inspection, a sewer inspection, if you're not familiar with that, it's a plumber pretty much that goes out with this long scope, this big snake, and at the end of the snake is a little camera. It's kind of cool. I mean, so make sure you go on some of these if you can, and be there with them. They're not going to have a key, so you're going to have to be there anyway to open up the house and really monitor them. The idea being that if you have a stranger in the house, you're not there, they start stealing stuff or breaking stuff, we're all liable. So be there for this, and it's cool. They've got a little screen. They're sending this sucker all the way out to the sewer, and you'll see kind of what's in there. Obviously, there's some nasty stuff. Usually, it's just kind of water, brown water. But it's usually not that bad. And then you see roots, and you see cracked pipes, and you see all sorts of stuff in there. You can see pipes degrading, they might be rusting, things like that. And so just foot by foot they go, and they'll mark it down and say, hey, at the 56-foot mark, there are roots that are coming in. They'll take quick pictures of that, and then you can kind of bring that to the seller afterwards and say, hey, there's a real root problem. you wanna do these, especially in older houses. If it's newer and it was hooked up to the sewer with modified materials that are a little bit better, they basically plastic, they last longer. Um, that's fine. But if it's an older house, if it was built in the 30s or the 20s or the 40s, those are the houses that use these clay tiles. And those clay tiles, those things are not tiles, like clay, I don't know. You guys know. You get the picture. Clay pipes, they all kind of fit together. And those are the ones that degrade, and the roots can get through those, and they crack, and they break, and they clog everything. And it can be a real nightmare. So uh, the inspection will let you know if those are good and if they're still intact. If you have to replace one, it still means you got to dig down 5, 6, 7, 8 feet and replace that one. So it's a real process. The first house I bought, the tiles failed 2 months after we closed on it. And my wife and I are out there digging for months. It's a long trench to replace everything because it was $9,000, and we were young and poor and didn't have any money to pay for a new sewer line. So we learned the hard way. But do those sewer inspections, especially if it's an older house or if you think there's some sort of problem. If you hear about a backed up toilet, they flush, and there's occasionally problems with water coming back. There's something in there, and it's usually roots, but it can be other things as well. So that is a sewer inspection. And then a neighborhood inspection. Sometimes you want to come back, and that typically can be in the neighborhood review period. That's where you want to bring your clients back maybe at night. I've talked about this one before in Ballard. I had a house that I was helping this couple buy, and we went back to it on a Friday night, and the Ballard High School lights were on, and these floodlights were coming into the house. And it's like, whoa, wait a second. So occasionally our whole backyard and back of the house is going to be lit up with these spotlights. So they ended up not buying it. That fell into the neighborhood review. Now, general inspections. This is an important one that a lot of people don't realize. And this one has been tried at the highest levels. Washington Supreme Court caught wind of this one a few years ago. If an individual wants to self-inspect, they can. So it doesn't have to be a licensed, bonded, insured inspector. It can just be you and Uncle Fred out there, and you go, hey, you know what? I don't like the apple tree. The apple tree, I don't like apples. I decided I'm allergic to them. And so bam, you've decided that you don't want the house, or your clients decided that. Oh, let me get back to mute all. Had some noise there. Okay, there we go. Your client decides they don't want the house because of the curb appeal, because of the apple tree, whatever. It can be any reason. They can bow out as long as it is during that inspection period. So some brokers, they contested that. They said, hey, you can't bow out because it has to be a licensed, bonded, insured inspector. It went to the Supreme Court of Washington, and they said, no, it doesn't. So that is also an out. So once you have that out, and once it's expired, then the other out is probably going to have to be the financing addendum. Financing addendum survives the contract all the way through close. So just remember that. Of course, always email me, text me, call me if you have questions about this. Okay, any questions about inspections? Nope. Well, we are just chugging along here. Fantastic. Okay, appraisals. So appraisals, remember, the eyes and the ears of the lender. The appraiser is there to not just annoy us, because they do, way much more so than the inspectors. The appraisers are there to make sure the value's there. And there's this underlying tone to it all to make sure there's even more value there, meaning bring that price down. There's some good appraisers just go on the facts. Good appraisers say, you know what, I'm just going to appraise this as it should be. There are appraisers out there, though, I don't know what happened to them, if they were dropped as babies, if they're just bad people. I don't know. But a lot of times they always come back. Certain ones always come back low, and really low too. They're trying to find the worst comps they can. And I've got, like, in different markets, excuse me, in different markets, I do know of certain ones. And if I see their name on something, I'm like, oh my God, help me. This is going to be a struggle. So how it all works, let's start from point A. The appraisers are assigned a transaction from an appraisal management company. So the Dodd-Frank bill, those of us that have been doing it for decades, we remember when we could just call up an appraiser and say, hey, will you appraise this house? And they give you a report, and then you take them for drinks, and the report's always kind of nice. It's everything you want to see. Well, the Dodd-Frank bill eliminated all that. So they created appraisal management companies, a middle company, so that the client, the borrower, remember this is all the lending side now, the borrower can order through the appraisal management company, give them a credit card up front, and the appraisal management company will go to the different appraisers they're set up with and order the appraisal through them, depending on what the appraisal is. That cost went from $300 in appraisal to $600, $700 in appraisal. So now you're seeing the method in the madness. But that is what the Dodd-Frank bill has required. My personal opinion is that we needed something to, it was okay to regulate appraisals a little bit because they were causing the problem. Like most things, we overregulated, and now it's a little bit too hard. So it'd be nice to see a little bit of balance there, where they're still regulated, where they're still ordered by the lender, but we can bring that cost down because there doesn't have to be a middleman involved. Anyway, my personal opinion, which doesn't amount to 2 cents, usually 1 cent. Okay, so the appraiser is ordered through this appraisal management company, is paid for in advance, and they schedule a time to go out there. The appraisals, the inspections, remember, take 2 to 3 hours. The appraisal takes, and unfortunately today, because they're not accountable to anyone, the appraisers can take 10 minutes. I mean, they go out there, they measure rooms, they take some pictures, they kind of get an idea of the layout, they'll jot some notes down, and they're out of there. So there are certain kinds of appraisals. Let's see, where am I in my notes here? Yeah, okay, so I can get into those. So there are certain kinds of appraisals that require a special designation. FHA, VA, USDA, those are government loans that require a specialized appraiser to be able to do them. All the rest are conventional conforming loans, and that's just a regular appraisal designation. To become an appraiser, it'd probably be easier to become a doctor right now than an appraiser. It is unbelievable. I would ask how many hours you guys think it takes, but I don't want to wait for the answers. It takes 2,500 hours to become an appraiser. I mean, let that sink in. 2,500 hours to get on the exact same MLS that we have access to and fill out a little report. It is not that complicated. So again, that comes from the Dodd-Frank bill. That's not something that was just made up. There's kind of a fourth level of education, continuing education, all sorts of stuff. So we're not seeing a lot of new appraisers, or we haven't seen a lot of new appraisers during the 8 years the Dodd-Frank bill's been implemented. We're starting to see more now, just because the job market is so good for appraisers, inspectors, all that. So a lot of people are kind of dipping their toes into it and seeing if they can make a living at it. It's not a difficult job to do, but 2,500 hours is a lot to become a certified appraiser. So that puts pressure on the existing appraisers to do the job that probably another 20, 30% are needed to do. So that all that means to us is delays, cost and delays. So if the appraiser can't get out there for 2 weeks, or in the case of a FHA, maybe 3 weeks, or in the case of a VA loan, maybe 6 weeks. It was 2 years ago in Portland, it was the worst. There weren't enough VA approved appraisers. It was taking 6 weeks to get a VA appraisal. I know that's gotten better now, so it's more reasonable now, and more people have gotten their designations. But still, it can take a long time. And the appraiser goes out there, they take those notes, they take some measurements of the rooms, they go back, they kind of draw up a map of the house and the rooms and the square footage. If it's a VA, if it's a government appraisal, they have to take into account chipping or peeling paint. None of that paint, if someone goes to clean it, and let's say they kind of sand off the paint and they put some kills on there, some primer, just to pass the appraisal. But the chipped paint is down in the dirt, that's not good enough. They'll notice that and they'll call it out. They can also call out the roof. They're going to call out any cracked windows. They're going to call out any systems that are not working. They are going to turn the heat and the air conditioning on, and they're going to make sure those work. They're going to take a picture of the attic or crawl space, make sure there's no mold or leaking or anything like that, or infestations. So they do take some quick pictures and they apply that to the appraisal. And then when they go back to their office or their home, they sit down at the computer. They've got an appraisal form. That's this long form as well. And they put the pictures in there. They kind of look at, then they look at comps. And they've got to find comps, comparables, to support the value in that purchase price. So that's what they're doing. They're the eyes and the ears of the lender. The lender wants a lower appraised price because that mitigates risk. So for example, if the purchase price is agreed on at $200,000 and the lender, there's only 5% down, well, that 5% represents the risk the lender's taking on. In case there's a default, they've only got that 5% down to spend a year foreclosing on the house. So they're going to lose a lot more money. If there is a low appraisal, if the appraisal comes in at, let's say, 180, well, now there's $20,000. They're pretty sure the house is worth 200, but they've got an appraisal of 180. They know they've got $20,000 of risk mitigation cushion in there. Does that make sense? Anyways, so the appraisers are kind of bringing the price down a little bit. That benefits the lender, and they lose less money in case of default. Okay, T. No questions. Okay, good. Oh, Allison. Do we have to meet the appraiser at the property? Yes. Meet them at the property. I'm trying to think. Appraisers, a lot of appraisers are licensed real estate agents as well. They're licensed to be out there. So you don't have to technically meet them out there if they do have a license, but I think it's always smart to do that. And the reason is, I should say list agent or selling agent. Actually, the selling agent, and I'll tell you why. Because the mortgage, so okay, let me start over. You don't have to be out there if they're a licensed real estate agent, and a lot of them are, most of them are. You don't have to, but you should, because you can actually influence, as a real estate agent or broker, you can influence that appraiser. That's a person, you know, and if you kind of strike up a conversation and you have a rapport with them, good things can happen. If you don't, they're just going to go do their job very quickly, not thoroughly, not well, and just get out of there and collect their money. The loan officer, the lending company, they can't do anything. They cannot contact that appraiser. They cannot meet them out there. Federal law prohibits it. So a lot of times I'll go out there and meet the appraiser as a real estate agent. I never tell them that I'm a loan officer. But I meet them as a real estate agent and just say, hey, how you doing? Can I help you with anything? Do you have any questions about the house? And it might be someone you know or someone you know through someone else, and you can strike up a conversation, and that can really benefit you. Because remember, these appraisals can kill deals. If they kill a deal, that kills our commission. And that's what we want, is the commission and whatever else comes with that. Now, I say that I say it in jest. Of course, we want to do a good job, but you know, the commission is kind of the end result that we're really shooting for, and we want everyone to be satisfied and act professionally, and then everything works well. But that's what I do, Allison, is I meet them out there and try to strike up the conversation and just see if I can influence them a little bit. Just so they're like, you know, I'll use this comp instead of that comp because I like this guy or I like this person. I want to make sure this deal happens. Again, 80–90% of appraisers want it to happen, but I'm telling you, there are appraisers out there that almost want to kill a deal. And I probably shouldn't use kill. That's not the right word. But they want to make sure that the appraised value is way lower than the purchase price. And that can be a problem. That really hurts a lot of transactions. And again, you guys might not see it because you're doing, you know, one here, two there, a dozen a year, whatever it's going to be. But as a company, we're doing 3,000 a year, and so I see a lot of deals that are really upset by the appraiser. So appraisals should be ordered after the inspection. So just remember this: you don't want your client to have to fork out $400 for the inspection and $600 for the appraisal. And that's where appraisers are. That's what they're charging. Because remember, the management company's got to make their share, and then they pay the appraiser whatever their part is. But you want the inspection to go first and clean, because what happens if you're in the inspection period and they decide they don't like the house. They decide that the roof is absolutely a mess. They find out there's mold in the house, and they just don't want to go through with the purchase. You don't want them to have had paid for a $600 appraisal if they're not moving forward. So the key in the timelines is immediately, the day the transaction is signed around, get on the horn, talk to the inspectors, make sure you get a good inspector to get out there as soon as possible. Once that inspection response is done and everyone agrees to any sort of changes or fixes, then order the appraisal right away. You do want, that's part of the lending process, so you do, the day the transaction is signed around, you want to make sure your clients are in with their loan officer and getting them all their documentation and signing their loan application and all that. So they want to be in underwriting for those 10 days while the inspection's happening for those 10 days. And then on that 10th day, if everything's good and everyone agrees to everything and they're moving forward with the transaction, then have the lender order the appraisal. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, so timelines are important. It's really vital that you kind of manage those timelines. And then you order the appraisal. You never know, again, what the appraisal time is going to be. Could be 30 days. That's part of the process. It's a little bit of art and science when you're doing the closing date. Because if it's cash, well, I can close in 2 weeks or sooner. If it's a conventional loan, you can close 30 days or sooner. If it's a VA loan, it could be 45 days or sooner. Okay, so just kind of remember that. The best thing to do, again, the day the documents are signed around, the transaction is signed around, that's when you want to be talking to the loan officer as well as the inspector, everybody. You want to get the earnest money in with a copy of the transaction to escrow. All sorts of things are happening on that first day. Okay, let's back up or go forward or somewhere. Let's go forward to the appraisal coming out. So the appraiser has done their job, hopefully well. They bring an appraisal back in, and hopefully it's at value, meaning the agreed upon price was $200,000. The appraiser comes in at $200,000. Some people get upset. They're like, you know what, we got a great deal on this house. It's worth $220. Why did the appraiser come in? They typically just want to support the value if it's there. They're not going to go above that very often. The scary part's when they come down. And the reason they can come down in value, there's a few reasons. Actually, let me hold off on that. I'm going to do low appraisals here after I do developing value. Okay, so how do they develop value? Let me just go over that real quick. It's pretty simple. I will get on, we'll do Spokane MLS. Okay, remember the appraiser is using the exact same information you have on your MLS. And so they get into the MLS and they go, okay, I've got to find value here. So they're going to search, let's say a residential house. We'll use the same scenario that we had before. We'll say a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house for $200,000. And there's certain parameters they have to use. Number one, price. So if it's 200, they're probably going to go 180. And this is also how you value properties. 180 to 220. Whenever I'm valuing properties, I think more like an appraiser than I do just a real estate agent. Because that's ultimately who we have to answer to and support the value of the appraiser. So I do active. I can actually do contingent and sold. I can do all of these. Where are we? Sold, pending, sold. There we are. So I'm going to do all of these. And the sold, this is a real key component to it. the sale has to have happened in the last 6 months. So I go to close date and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. September 21st, 2017. The other parameter is a mile out. So there's typically a circumference button when you're searching on the map, and that's for the appraisers mostly. And you're going to love this. Actually, you're going to hate it because I hate it. This computer I have doesn't do the map searching circumference. So it says draw here. So let's X out of there. We'll go to the Spokane Valley out here. It says draw a radius. My computer is kind of a newer computer. Oh, it does let me do it. Okay, finally, something happened. Oh, let's go. I'm going to cancel that. Edit, cancel. Get in a little bit closer and do the draw circle. Let's say the house is right there on 10th. I can go out a mile or so. So they'll go out a mile, and this is actually supposed to tell me a mile or less. And again, it's a goofy thing with my computer. I'm not sure why it does what it does. But so they go out a mile technically. And that's the first parameter. If they're in the country or they're in a difficult market, they can go out a little bit further, inch by inch or mile by mile, but they have to really make sure they can't find those comps within a 1 mile radius. So we do that and we add to criteria. And bedrooms. Now bedrooms, you can go up one or go down. So we're looking at 4 bedrooms, so I can do 3, 4, 5, because the subject property is 4. And bathrooms typically have to remain the same. You might be able to squeeze in a little half bath, but you don't want to go up or down a full bath. And oops, how did I cancel that? 2, save. Okay, and then you want to get into really year built. Think of it this way, 10 years up, 10 years down. So if the house was, the subject property is 1970, you can usually go 1960 to 1980. These could be some ugly houses. And then you get into assessed square footage and total square footage. The assessor's never going to use below grade square footage, even if it's finished beautifully, they're not going to use that. So you want to find comps that are similar. If they have below grade square footage, then great. If the comps have below grade square footage, they're good comps. But you want to make sure the total square feet comes in relatively similar. So we'll say 2,000 to 2,500. That might put us out of the, okay. And so on and so forth. Actually, I'm going to do 1,800. Oh, I got 5. Okay, that's good. So 1,800 to 2,500. So I've got 5 comps. And what the primary comp is going to be sold. Oh, good. So these are all sold. No active comps. So they want to use sold properties first, and then if they can't find enough sold properties, they'll use stuff that's either on the market or pending. And sometimes they'll contact you and say, hey, what's the purchase price going to be on this pending contract? I can't find comps for it. Can you just tell me what the purchase price is? And so a lot of times appraisers will call you and they'll ask for that kind of information. So now we sort by price. Ours is a $200 subject property. We don't see any right at 200, so we see 190, and it's sold at 190. So this can be a little bit goofy, and what you're hoping they do is they go up $17,000, they go down 10, and they go down 15. So then they've got comps going, hey, we could go on the high side or we could go on the low side. We're going to support that value in the middle at 200,000. So that's really what they're doing when they're looking at value. Any questions on that? Okay, so that's the appraiser coming in with those comps. You can disagree with them. It's pretty fruitless. Sometimes, and the reason it's fruitless is because you're basically calling them out, saying you didn't do a good job. The appraisal management company, they don't want to do that because they could lose them as an appraiser. The appraisers take it personally. They're like, hey, what do you know? You're just a real estate broker. I'm an appraiser. Remember, I did that 2,500 hours of classes to become an appraiser. So they get a little bit arrogant there. and it's hard to get that value supported from your comps. It can happen. Typically, what I see is if you disagree with it, you can do a reconsideration of value through the appraisal management company. You fill out a form, you send them the comps that you have, and they'll reconsider it. But again, it almost always goes nowhere, or they might go up or down $500. You know, they might throw you a bone. You're looking for $10,000, and they're like, oh, I'll increase the price by 500. Nice comp. So a reconsideration of value rarely happens, and that can be really frustrating because again, you got a $200,000 purchase price. The appraisal looks like it's going to come in at 195. Okay. So that's how they find the comps. Remember, 1 mile out, 6 months back, and the same kind of parameters, same bathroom, maybe up or down, a bedroom if they can, similar years and styles, all that stuff. The closer the better, the more recent the sale, the better. So they're trying to get the most recent stuff. But here's the rub. The rub is that sometimes they can't get that. It's just not there. The comps aren't there. So they go back 6 months. They find a comp that sold 5 months and 28 days ago. Well, guess what? Well, let's take Seattle, for example. Seattle has appreciated, I think the number was 10.9% last year, something like that. So let's say 11%. Appreciated 11% in a 12-month period. Well, you go back 6 months, that's 5.5% appreciation that we missed. So if they come in at 195 from a comp from 6 months ago, 5.5% increase is $10,000. The value of the house now is $205,000, not 195. So that's the rub. That's what bugs me the most. And if they're lazy, they just go with that comp from 6 months ago. And you might be like, well, wait a second. I talked to this listing agent. They're under contract. They're going to close next week, and they're closing at 212. And the appraiser might consider it. They might not. So it's a battle. It's a struggle. So you get a low appraisal, and we're seeing those low appraisals because the comps are 6 months back. You've got a ready, willing, and able party that will spend $200. You certainly have a seller that wants to see a higher price, but the appraisal's holding things back. So you have a low appraisal. What do you do in a low appraisal situation? Well, there's a form. It's a notice of low appraisal, number one. So you want to do a notice of low appraisal. You're sending that to the seller. You're saying, hey, look, the appraisal came back at 195. I know we agreed upon 200. We have choices. Our choices are really simple. Mr. Seller, you agree to 195, and we're good. Let's move forward. Or Mr. Seller, you won't agree to 195, but you were going to give us $5,000 in closing costs. We'll go ahead and negate that. We'll take that out of the contract, and we'll get the closing costs paid by the lender. That can happen. So call me if you ever need that situation. So that can happen. Or the third option is that the buyer just bring in $5,000. So they just go, okay, you know what, I'm going to bring in the cash for you. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the full value. You can negotiate. You can say, well, look, let's meet in the middle. Let's do $197,500. So my buyer is going to come in with $2,500, and we'll agree on that price based on the low appraisal. Okay? I sound like the teacher from South Park. Okay. But yeah, we're just going to go with it. So lots of K's in there. So the low appraisals, it happens a lot, unfortunately. Prices are going up so fast. There's some real issues with that, but there's ways to mitigate it. So what I want to do is let's go back to the offer itself. So this is in a situation when you guys have a buyer, and the buyer's in a tough market, and you've got competitive offers, multiple offers. You've already seen the pre-inspection. That's been taken care of. The appraisal comes in low. The way to make a really strong offer is to do a, God, I forget the form in Washington. There's a form there, but it's effectively saying we will bring in cash up to a certain amount if the appraisal comes in low. So we'll bring in $10,000, up to $10,000 cash if the appraisal comes in low. And that is pretty good. If I'm a seller and I see that, I'm like, you know what? I like your offer. Even though the total amount might not be more than this other offer, I like that because I'm worried about that appraisal coming in low. It's boy, it's happening a lot. I mean, if you're in Seattle, if you're in Portland, it's happening a bunch. So that's a really strong offer to be able to come in with cash. Now, sometimes there's some real nuances to this. Sometimes you'll get a client that wants to put 20% down. So like, look, I don't have any more money. I'm putting 20% down. That's $200,000 deal. That's $40,000. So they're putting $40,000 down. Well, they don't have to have mortgage insurance, and they can still put 10% down and use that cash to make up for a low appraisal. A lot of borrowers don't realize that, buyers don't realize it, and a lot of agents don't realize it. It's like you can buy out the mortgage insurance for like a quarter point to interest rate. So, and if you can find a lower interest rate, adding that quarter point is still less than the big banks. So again, call me if you get into that situation, or if you really want to make the strongest offer. Let me take a look at the nuts and bolts of what you have and see if we can make the strongest offer. And part of that strongest offer is going to include the provision for a low appraisal. And that's just the market we're in now. It stinks. But it is what it is. So the appraisers are kind of, in some ways, I guess it's okay, because they're keeping the prices depressed as much as they can. So prices are skyrocketing. They're going up left and right. People are willing to pay anything in these real hot markets, but the appraisers are the governor on the price. They're keeping that price down. Okay, any questions on that? If you get a low appraisal, let me know if you have a question and we can go through it together. Doing your own valuations, I kind of went into that. I think about it as an appraiser, more so than I think of it as a real estate agent just doing a CMA. So you can do a comparative market analysis. They're real easy. Right there, CMA. Every software, MLS software, has one where you can just kind of put together a CMA. Here, using Paragon, you basically create a presentation. And I won't go through it all because it is kind of long. You basically are filling out almost, it's almost like a listing. So you're filling out all this information, and that's the subject property. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, built in 1954, so on and so forth. Square footage, lot square footage, style. So you're putting all of that in there, and then you're running a CMA, which is pulling the comps, the best comps it can find. That's fine. That's good. And it puts it in a pre-package, and you can email it off to your client and go, here's our CMA, and this is what we think the value is. There's more to it than that, though. There's a little bit of art and science involved. Oh, Allison. If the appraiser calls the roof, for example, does the roof need to be replaced before closing or after? Good question. It depends. Let's see, the answer of the day. It seems like across our country. It depends. Mostly it depends on the lender. So where I would go with that first, Allison, I'd go to the lender and say, can you do an escrow holdback? My client's willing to take care of it, but they're not going to pay for a new roof when they don't own the property. So the way to get around that is an escrow holdback, $10,000 put into escrow, paid directly to the roofer after it closes. And so a lot of times that happens in the winter too. You can't start tearing off roads in January, snowstorms and all that. So escrow holdbacks are a good way to kind of keep the money in escrow so people don't run off and spend it, and it's applied to the roof later. So the lender's satisfied because they want the roof done. They want a good roof. It's their investment. Always think of it that way. Until you pay off a house and you own it free and clear, it's the lender's house. That's their investment. So they want to make sure everything is up to date. And so escrow holdback is the best way to do that with the lender. Not all lenders do it. We're seeing more and more. 5 years ago, nobody did it. It was just like everyone was still just freaked out by the Dodd-Frank bill. They were freaked out by all the different parameters to get a loan through. And so that became a real problem. In the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of companies, most companies, willing to do those escrow holdbacks. Okay. But in some, Allison, no, the deal's not going to happen if the roof is called out and no one's taking care of it. The lender's just not going to finance it. And it would die. Again, I keep using that, and I apologize for being so negative. I've been trying to teach, I got 4 boys, and I try to teach them not to think this way for obvious reasons. The deal will fall apart on the financing contingency, and the buyer's going to get their earnest money back. But the roofs do get called out. If that does get called out, you typically want to do a special roof inspection. Most lenders want to see a 5-year roof cert, so a certification. It can depend, 3 to 5 years, but most of them want to see 5. If they get a specialist out there saying, I certify this roof for 5 years, the loan can happen. Now, obviously, if the seller puts a brand new roof on there and has the same purchase price, then great, the buyer benefits from that. So it does depend on the purchase price. What can happen is you raise up the price. So it's $10,000 to replace the roof. The seller goes, look, the deal's not going to close because they won't do an escrow holdback. I don't want to do that. I'll replace it. I'll spend the $10,000 next week. I'll tear it off. I'll put a new roof on there. But let's raise the price $10,000. And that's not a bad option because really it's the buyer who's benefiting from a new 30-year roof, and they get to finance it. That's all they're doing is they get to finance it in with their loan. Now we go back to appraisals. If it doesn't appraise for that inflated price, then we're back at square one. So it is a concern. The best place to start is usually with the loan officer. Find out if they'll do an escrow holdback. If they won't, call me. Let's figure it out. I've seen enough of these and kind of know how to creatively get around it, at least a solution. A lot of people, sometimes they just dig in. Seller's not going to spend a dime. The buyer's like, no way, I'm not going to do this. And if we don't have a meeting of the minds, it's not going to happen. So we need people to be flexible and willing to work to get the deal closed. Okay, hopefully that answered your question in a convoluted, screwed up joke kind of way. Where was I? Oh, yes, here we go. Your own valuations. Okay, so back to the art and science. The science part of it is the CMA and the MLS. So you got an idea of the comps that are out there. The problem is when you're doing a valuation for, let's say, a seller, the problem is you've got the public to deal with, and you have perceptions, and you have remodels, you have expenses that they put into the house. You've got all these different things, and then you've got emotion. So you've got, it could be, I sold one for a neighbor of mine that 94 years old. He paid it off in like 1970. He was an old doctor, 94 years old, raised 6 kids there, had all these memories. Every scratch in the paint was some deal that happened with the kids. All these memories. So the house was worth so much more to him. He hadn't changed anything in 45 years. It was like 1970 was the last time you replaced the carpets or appliances. And so you guys can imagine, you got the brown it was a brown one. He had a brown oven, but sometimes you get the pea green stoves and ovens. Back from the 70s, you get carpets and shag carpet. So to them, they think it's worth so much because they have these wonderful memories there, and they're like, oh, a new family, a young family can have all these wonderful memories here as well. Well, these young families are pretty sophisticated. They see a lot of images. We didn't see those, the old farts like me. We didn't see those way back when because we didn't have computers. But they see a lot of images out there. They want the house to look a certain way. They want all these materials. They want to remodel, blah, blah, blah. So we're two different places. And that's where the emotion comes in. So there's an art to this as well. And that's where you have to really be firm but gentle to talk them into why you think the price is going to be lower. When you are doing a CMA or when you're pricing something for a seller, the best place to start is them. Ask, what do you want for this house? Well, I want $400,000. It's worth 2-ish. 400,000 really isn't reasonable. You can present all that evidence and give an estimate of value and try to go with what they want, but bring it down to a reasonable level. That's the art form to this. It's a real art to bring emotions in check and kind of massage it all together to have a feel for those houses and the value. One thing I do with a lot of clients, or I used to do when I did more real estate, I used to take clients out to the competition. I say, okay, before we list this, Let's go to house A, B, C, and D in the neighborhood, and you tell me what you think of those houses. Then they go in there and they go, okay, wow, this is really nice. Boy, they did stuff that I haven't done yet, and they're asking less than what I want. Then the light bulb goes on. They start going, oh, maybe I shouldn't ask 400. What do you recommend? And if they still want to go high, that's okay, because I get it. You're competing with the big boxes that has some person over there that's like, I'll tell you it's worth 4. Absolutely, I can get 4 for this, knowing they can't. It's a real estate sales tactic. People do that, and then the bloodbath ensues. Then they argue, they fight. For 6 months, it's pain, bringing that price down so that they can get the sale. They'll tell the client, potential client, anything they want to get the listing. Don't be that person. It's okay if you want to go a little bit higher. And I usually tell them, I temper it with, like, here's where I think the value is, but if you want to go a little bit higher, that's fine. We can test the market, but be ready to bring it down if we don't get offers in the first month. And then the next month, let's bring it down even more. And we may have to come down to where I think it's going to be. Are you okay with that? So at least if you had that expectation set properly, they're okay with bringing the price down later on. So there's that art to massaging it, to listening to them, what their goals are, what their wants are, and then taking the science behind it, the CMA, and all the different information you get. Now, the different information you get, I usually go right to Zillow, because all of us in the industry hate Zillow mostly. I mean, some of you are getting leads from it, but it has screwed up the paradigm in a lot of ways. But I go there because that's where the customers are going. So remember, a customer, if they're not under contract, if you've got an agency agreement with them, they're a client. But that's where the public is going. They're going to Zillow and Realtor.com, and they're looking at all these houses, and they're seeing a Zestimate of 190, and you're trying to sell it for 220, and they're like, well, Zillow said. Well, Zillow doesn't know. Zillow is an algorithm that is pulling comps from all over. You could be on top of the hill with a beautiful view, and then you've got a comp that's at the bottom of the hill in a much rougher area with no view and a worn down house. Zillow doesn't take that into account. They're just looking at square footage and assessed value and things like that. So their Zestimate, that's why it's all over the place. It could be way up here, it could be way down here, we just don't know. But that's where the customer's going. And so you have to kind of take that into account. And I'll show that to the seller, say, hey, look, this is what the public's going to see. They're going to see these houses right now that are on the market, that we're competing with in the neighborhood. And then we've got, this is what the public sees, a Realtor or Zillow or Trulia and these sites. So that's what we're going to have to compete with a little bit. Then the final place I go is the county assessor. And actually, it's usually the first place, but in the process, you want to make sure you go to the assessor's website, see what the county appraiser says. So the assessor, when they bring in valuations, that's a licensed appraiser that's doing it. So they have a reason for the value that they put on it. It's usually a little bit low because it's lagging back a year. So it's usually lower than where the value is going to be on the open market. But at least it's a way to go, okay, the 3 houses in the neighborhood that we're competing against all have much lower assessed values. Our assessed value is much higher, which means that appraiser for the county thinks our house is better. That can kind of help support it. Or conversely, if the assessed value is lower, you can go back to your seller and go, the assessor thinks your house is valued lower than these 3 in the neighborhood. We really should temper the price. And then you go back to being that the art form of keeping emotions in check and saying, this carpet isn't what people like anymore. It probably needs to be replaced. The buyer's going to want this done. But yeah, I've dealt with that a bunch where sellers they think that red shag carpet from 1976 is fantastic. And why would anybody want anything different? So that's, we have to deal with a lot of that. If you have any questions with the valuation, just email me or call me. I'll take a look at it and kind of give you my opinion the best I can without seeing the house. I'm not going to go out to the house and do all that. But do look at the comps that are on the market, the stuff that you're going to be competing with on the market at that time. Okay. Questions? Nope. Okay, we are motoring along, people. I love it. Okay. Ultimately, it's about the client. Okay, I just touched on that a little bit. It is about them. It's what they want when they're selling a house. You know, we have to be the professional to mitigate any sort of wild emotions. We have to follow the law. So if we know any adverse material fact about the house, we have to disclose it. We have to be honest about it. We have to advise them that they have to be honest about it. There's a lot of different ways things can get discovered. So for example, what did I have a few years ago? Oh, the pool. So if there was on the property disclosure, the seller put there was never been any flooding. Well, the pool did leak years and years ago and leaked into the basement and flooded the basement. They made an insurance claim. The insurance company fixed it, cleaned it up, sealed the cracks, redid the pool, whatever they did, and they didn't disclose it because they didn't want that to be an adverse material fact that the buyer would know to bring the value down. Well, guess what? The insurance company found out. So any sort of claim that has been done in the past on that house, there's a system that will find any claims that have been made. And so they got busted. And thankfully, the buyer just wanted out, and I told the seller, you got to let them out. If they go to the state, we're going to be in trouble. And when I say we, I mean you, because I didn't know about it. If you do know about a material fact, in fact, an adverse material fact, you will get in trouble as well. So we have to disclose not just to our client, but to anyone out there in the general public. So it's about the client, but we're the professionals that are going to temper their excitement, enthusiasm, delusion, maybe. We have to really make sure that it's reasonable expectations. With a buyer as well, you know, with a buyer, you have to kind of say, okay, you know, there was a problem with this, but it was mitigated. It should be fine. I've seen buyers, I had a couple, maybe 12 years ago, they were buying a new property, brand new house, a young couple who was a doctor but just got out of residency, and a very smart young couple, but they knew what they wanted, and by golly, they were going to get it. So they did a walkthrough at the end, and they noticed on the foundation that there was a little chunk of concrete that had broken off, just a little chunk. They wanted the entire house torn down, and they wanted the entire foundation repoured. And you can only imagine, you know, everybody in the situation was like, whoa, wait a second here. That's not going to happen. And I explained to them there's two kinds of concrete, cracked or about to be cracked. I mean, concrete cracks. It shifts around, it adjusts. It doesn't compromise the integrity of the concrete. It just kind of moves around. That's welcome to planet Earth. So they went haywire on that. Ultimately, we got it resolved because I was able to talk them down and work it out. But they thought it would be reasonable to tear the house down and redo it all. So we have to set expectations right. We have to be the calm professional to guide them through this myriad of complications. And ultimately, we get to a successful sale. And if you do that, they really, really appreciate it. And that's where the referrals come from. So it is about the client. It's about reasonable expectations, and it's about professionalism. Okay. Any questions on valuations, inspections, appraisals? Nope. Fantastic, guys. We did this in about an hour and 10 minutes. That was perfect, right where I wanted to be. So you always can call me, you always can text me, you always can email me if you have a certain scenario or situation. I love doing this. This is the part of the job I love most. The administrative side and some of the complaints from different people, that's the part I don't like. But I am definitely here for you guys if you need me. Okay, we'll conclude real estate inspections, appraisals, and valuations. We're going to start up a new series. I do want to tell you, if there's a topic you want me to cover, please email me. We're trying to look for new topics and kind of improve on what we've already built with the Fuse training. But if there's something out there that really is kind of like, I think everyone would benefit from this topic, let me know. And that concludes March 21st. Fuse training. Everyone have a fantastic week. Obviously, go Zags. I know you're all Gonzaga basketball fans like me, so they play tomorrow at 7:05 p.m. And if you try to get in touch with me at 7:06, you won't, because I will have my phone turned off. And hopefully I don't throw it through a window based on how they play. So that's it, guys. Have a very good week, and I'll see you next week.